So I want to ask you a question. Basically, what are the key trends in hardware you're experiencing, and what type of product are you looking at? Anastasia, maybe you want to start, and then, yeah.
Least movement possible. Okay, we're good. What are we starting to see? So I mentioned kind of wearables. Wearables are the hot topic. They're meant to be worth multi-billion-dollar industry in the next few years. But it's very much, I kind of touched on it, the idea of form and function. So trying to, rather than just trying to dominate the wrist, which is what everyone's trying to do, there's only so much space on the wrist. So trying to actually have a product that does a lot of different things and also looks beautiful and integrates into your daily life within the wearable space. Lots of stuff in drones. IoT is a huge area, but obviously the accuracy is a problem with a lot of IoT startups. And there's going to be some really interesting stuff in the industrial side, less from a crowdfunding perspective because it's more B2B. What else is cool? Brains, loads of stuff in robots and brains. We've got a really cool robotics company launching in a couple of weeks.
Cool, thanks. I'll mention two that I think I mentioned very quickly before. The first one is anything that bridges the physical and the digital space. We think there's a kind of coming back to the physical things, especially in gaming. Anki is one of the companies we love in this space. There's one company in Grenoble that we invested in which works in that space. So first one. The second one, which again I mentioned briefly before, is what I call the hyper-customization. We think there is a biggest trend in everybody wants to have the same thing as the others, but specific to me. And this can be done by 3D printing, or this can be done by software. And just the fact that the Apple Watch, everybody will want to have the Apple Watch, but everybody will want to have, or for the ones who do, they will want to have their specific faces on the watch, so that it's theirs. So I think connected object and hardware will enable this hyper-customization.
Thanks. So I think I've seen a product in almost every single category. I can at least tell you one where I've been looking, which is slightly different to what I see, unfortunately. But I've been looking quite a lot into healthcare products almost on the diagnostics tools side. So we live in a world right now where there's been a huge explosion on the consumer side of health tech, as it were. So things which will help you measure your heartbeat and your steps and increasingly your blood sugar levels and everything else. And there is somewhere in there a crossover. From consumer stuff into clinical stuff. And for those of you interested in stuff, Foundation Medicine just got bought for over $1 billion. And it's a diagnostics kit. That's all it is. It's a piece of hardware that does health diagnostics. It can do gene sequencing. So if you have a cancer treatment, it can spot those for you. Now, those are two very different sides of the market, but I've been looking a lot into the ones in the middle, the transitions for people who can get easily accessible, cheap consumer diagnostics tools, which can be used in a clinical setting. Healthcare is one of the biggest challenges facing just about every country in the world, developed or not, and cheap access to diagnostics tools to triage people before they need to go into hospital, before they need primary care, is an incredibly important space. So that's one vertical. The other thing I've been looking a lot at, which is kind of cheating, is the enablers. The platforms in between. So I mentioned I'm investing in 3D hubs, which I think is an enabler of building hardware because it allows everyone to access 3D printers very cheaply. But software languages which are connecting things, GPS devices, Bluetooth devices, and lots of sort of near-form communication devices which connect objects, and other types of platforms which basically go across the verticals, I think is a really interesting area. And one where I think there's already been quite a lot of VC investment, but there's probably quite a long way to go before we have the full ecosystem of support where all of these verticals can be successful. And so there'll probably be a few more big companies built in those spaces.
Thanks. Thank you. First of all, don't go via James. Because in reality, if one VC refers to the next one, then the first question is, are you in? And if he's not in, then, it's not so good. So please find another way. So sorry to crash the party. So I'm totally with you in the variable space. So I have a dedicated passion for everything that produces implicit data. This might be software or hardware. I frankly don't care. The best is if it's both. So covered design as well. Member from you, they are doing an awesome job. Other than that, it's about the people. It was Kate convinced. She's founder of Covered. She convinced us. We liked the product as well, but it was mainly her. So it's really all open for great ambitious founders. Because frankly, I don't know what's going to be successful in 7 or 8 years. I'm clueless. So you need to figure it out, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe we can have like a last question and like last advice for all those hardware founders here, and just before starting the demo. What is your recommendation for any founders who wanted to start a hardware startup? What they need to do, what they need to check, what they need to be aware of, and how VC can help them scale?
Speak to as many as possible other hardware founders, people who worked in the industry, not so much with the existing industry that might be interesting at a later stage, but it's all about connectivity. Second, with the funding, you can build a company on 50K or 5 million or 50 million. The correlation whether some stuff works or not is not necessarily as you would imagine the correlation is. So too much money costs creativity, and it's beautiful that technology enables you guys. When I started in '91, it was actually, there was not even an internet. Yeah, there was nothing. It's much easier. That's why many more people do try it, and just get it a go. My last remark to this is, whatever you do, whether hardware or software, do it with passion.
Thanks. No, I agree with all of that. Maybe in 20 years' time, there'll be a room full of people, and I'll be able to say, when I started, there wasn't even a hardware club. I don't know how you did it. So I agree with everything Stefan just said. One other thing I'd say, and this is software and hardware focused, is the first question we ask people is, do you really care enough about this to do it for another 10, 20 years of your life? Because in many cases, that's what it will take. And you have to be happy with the concept. And if you look back over the history of, in particular, hardware innovators, I think of Dyson, right? It's been spending 40 years now with vacuum cleaners, and it worked. But you spent about 10 years of that with a vacuum cleaner no one wanted. So I think you've got to be really, really aware of the commitment you're making. And we ask people, because ultimately, we've probably made the same decision. When you go into venture, you have to commit to your investors for a very long time. But at least we have some stability there. But when you're going into a new sector, you're building a product, it's something you have to care passionately about, because this will be your life for the next 10 to 20 years. And if you really believe that, if you're completely convinced by that, I think definitely do it. But if you have any doubts at all, you need to talk to a lot of people to be sure. I think it's the number one difference I notice between the companies I've worked with that have made it and the ones that haven't.
Okay, maybe slightly different angle from me. I would say be careful of finding the perfect product. I think today with hardware, it's actually relatively easy to pack the product with sensors and alarms and connectivity in all different places. Think about the product that makes sense. So look for the best product, which might not be the perfect product.
Kind of building on what you two said, don't just create a product for product's sake, like actually try and solve a problem. Crazy idea, I know. Don't try and just get a quick exit, because it probably won't work. From a more kind of housekeeping side, there's so many things to think about with hardware. So get legal advice really early on. If you need to patent stuff, it's expensive, but maybe think about it. Focus on the software as well. Like the hardware essentially is the carrier. You make it, and it's, you throw in some sensors that probably don't cost that much money. It's the software that's going to help you scale, and it's also the software that's going to stop China copying you in 24 hours. So really focus on that. And yeah, legal is important. Don't simple things like choosing your name. Make sure it doesn't mean something rude in another language, because you're going to want to sell all over the world. And trust me, there's been some interesting cease and desist letters from things like that. So yeah, housekeeping. Think about all those things, like CE markings if it's anything to do with FDA, CE markings if it's anything to do with medical, and then patents and infringements and all things like that. Fun things.